My name is Greg Krasowski. I'm the founder and head of the international social community movement, the Center for the Restoration and Development of the Donetsk Coal Basin, otherwise known as Donbass. We're talking to you today to explain the mission and the activities of our center. The Center for the Restoration and Development of Donbass was set up by myself and other like-minded people to assist the residents of Donbass during this extremely severe time of civil warfare and civil strife in eastern Ukraine. It was founded to perform a non-political humanitarian function, to facilitate in the provision of humanitarian assistance first and foremost to the residents of Donbass, and also to aid and facilitate the revival and development of infrastructure and industry that has been damaged by the ongoing military conflict. First of all, we know that in order for any population to get through a time of man-made disaster, people need food, water, shelter, medicine, and other basic needs. Therefore, the first thing that we do is try to help in the delivery of humanitarian food assistance, to make sure that people can have clean drinking water, necessary medicine and medical supplies, as well as shelter over their head, whether it's the repair of their permanent shelters that has sustained damage from military activities, or the provision of temporary shelters to those that have been displaced by this conflict. Our center aims to work especially with the vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, senior citizens, and minor children. If you look at areas of our activities, one of the first areas is facilitating the delivery of humanitarian food assistance. The way we go about it is straightforward. First, we created a database of local organizations, community organizations, as well as government organizations that help us ascertain in what areas of Donbass humanitarian assistance is lacking currently. So therefore, we made a database of hospitals, schools, and other institutions that can help us figure out what's needed in local municipalities. We've contacted local municipal authorities. We've contacted local fire stations, police stations, churches, other houses of worship, to find out what they have and what's needed by the people that they serve. This database allowed us to get a pretty accurate picture that's independent of any potentially biased news coverage or information that people obtain from government sources on both sides of the fence. Once we did that, we created a database of current social and community organizations that provide humanitarian assistance to the residents of Donbass. The reason we did that is so we would be able to put together people who need aid with people who have aid to give them. The goal of this was eventually to help fairly and accurately distribute humanitarian assistance, as well as to reduce and streamline logistical and delivery costs, and to make sure that as much assistance as possible arrives with minimum losses due to corruption or due to military or government activity. Part of our assistance is helping people also clear customs if humanitarian assistance is coming through international borders. The other part of our activity, aside from talking to those who need humanitarian assistance and working with those who can provide it or are willing to start working with us in providing additional humanitarian help, is to be able to round up volunteers that can go to Donbass and help people within their areas of specialization, whether it's medical care, whether it's emergency services, whether it's construction or utility repairs. That's extremely important because Donbass has lost a good number of various professionals who had to flee war-ravaged conflict zones to save their lives and the lives of their families. So right now, certain areas of Donbass are experiencing a deficit, a shortage of qualified medical personnel, such as physicians, nurses, hospital orderlies. People have a shortage of paramedics, shortages of firemen, firefighters, law enforcement personnel, emergency utility repairmen, such as those who repair water utilities, natural gas deliveries, electrical repairs, things like that. Aside from those areas that I've discussed, eventually, once active warfare winds down, we understand that we can't provide humanitarian assistance forever. And very few residents of Donbass are willing, basically, to be dependents. People do want to get back to work and be able to provide on their own for their families. Therefore, one of our primary goals is to assist and facilitate in the revival and development of civilian infrastructure and, more importantly, industry, so people can go back to work. So factories, coal mines, metallurgical plants, and other industrial assets can start working again. Obviously, that's a very complicated process that involves a lot of factors, including political issues, economical and financial issues. It's very hard to get back to work when you don't have an active banking system, or you have an ongoing economic blockade of the region and you can't import or export either raw materials, components for manufacture, or finished product. Those are factors that need to be resolved by political negotiations, and those are beyond our area of competence, expertise, and outside our mission function. If we look at the people that we assist first and foremost, what I've previously mentioned are vulnerable populations, we're looking at working with senior citizens. They're extremely vulnerable. They haven't received pensions since Ukrainian government pensions since August. And right now we're already in January when we're making this recording. People have eaten through most of their savings, and they are literally surviving exclusively, solely, thanks to humanitarian assistance. Thanks to food deliveries of canned food, bread, other non-perishable foods, as well as soup kitchens, other humanitarian cafeterias where people can get free meals. Senior citizens, as we know, also require a lot of medical care. They need prescription drugs that at this point they cannot afford to buy. So therefore, what we need to make sure is that senior citizens have access to medical care. That means they need to have access to hospitals, to doctors' offices that haven't been destroyed, that are functioning, whose personnel are getting paid so they can go to work and treat these senior citizens, and that they also can receive proper medical care in terms of diagnostics, which means you need functioning medical equipment, X-ray equipment, CAT scans, MRIs, other diagnostic equipment, electrocardiograms, working labs, so you can have blood testing done, and other things that doctors test. We also need to make sure that senior citizens are able to receive prescription drugs that are required to treat life-threatening conditions such as blood pressure, cardiac problems, diabetes, and other pathologies that, if are left untreated, people will simply die from. Aside from senior citizens, we strive to provide assistance to minor children. These are children who are currently living in conflict areas, who often have to seek shelter in basements from artillery fire, from mortar fire, from surface-to-surface missiles, and other types of weapons that should have never been used in civilian areas. Unfortunately, it's beyond our mission scope to deal with use of weapons in civilian areas. But what we have to deal with are the fallout of the use of these weapons, especially the fallout on children. Aside from the threat to their life and safety, children are facing tremendous psychological damage. You can imagine what it's like for a 5-year-old to sit huddled in a basement as explosions rage outside. Therefore, we need to make sure the children are evacuated, if possible, and even to evacuate those, you need safety quarters, you need transportation. And if the family cannot afford transportation, they're going to need help with buses, with minivans, with drivers, with fuel for those vehicles, spare parts, tires, and everything else to make sure the children are evacuated. You also need temporary shelters. So these children can be housed temporarily until they're able to be relocated to other areas. For those children that are living in areas that currently are not under bombardment or artillery fire, we need to make sure that those children can minimize the psychological damage done to them by attending school. Therefore, education serves a twofold purpose. Aside from fulfilling a basic constitutional need of children, since they have a right to education, it helps them overcome the trauma from the Civil War. But those educational facilities need our assistance as well. Some of them have been damaged. Therefore, construction supplies are needed to repair schools. Utilities have to be repaired to those schools. So schools are heated, they have electricity, they have running water. Food is needed so children can be fed in school cafeterias, especially if they're not getting enough food at home. We need to make sure that educational staff are on hand. We have to ensure the safety of teachers who can teach those children, to make sure that these teachers are getting paid. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to buy any food to eat. And we've already heard of a number of incidents where educators have simply passed out during classroom instruction because of hunger. They just did not have the energy to teach, although they had the commitment to help the children under their care. So, as you can see, there's a myriad of needs that needs to be done in order for everyone to get by and to get through this conflict. Getting back to the needs of children, we need school supplies. Children need textbooks and everything else that a child needs for the educational process. Unfortunately, very little humanitarian assistance is entering the areas of Donbass that are controlled by the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics because of the blockade and embargo that has been enacted by the Ukrainian military. Ukrainian military personnel, whether it's army troops or troops of the National Guard or the volunteer battalions, often are not letting through humanitarian aid convoys because they believe that aid will go to the insurgents, to the separatists or the terrorists that the Ukrainian government calls these local Donbass insurgents. Unfortunately, the blockade of humanitarian convoys creates problems for Donbass's most vulnerable, senior citizens and children. So most of the assistance to these vulnerable groups of our population is coming currently from Russia and through Russia, through the Russian border. Aside from getting assistance to children and the elderly, we understand that there's a number of organizations that needs our assistance. If we look at medical care, we're talking about medical facilities, hospitals, medical clinics. If they've been damaged by active military activities, they need to be repaired. We need construction materials. We need to make sure that hospitals and medical clinics have electricity, have water supplies, natural gas supplies for heat, and everything else. As I mentioned before, we need to make sure that personnel are getting some sort of compensation so they can buy food. If not, then they have to be provided humanitarian assistance at work. So the medical personnel can come out and continue to treat patients, which you can't do if you don't have anything to eat or you don't have money for transportation to get to your place of work. Aside from medical facilities, we're also looking at educational facilities, schools, kindergartens, daycare centers, nurseries, also facilities for higher education, such as technical colleges, two-year colleges, universities. It's extremely important to minimize the impact of the current conflict on the segment of the population that should be in school. We're talking about on students. So those educational facilities have pretty much the same set of needs as any part of civilian infrastructure. Facility repairs, utility provision, and compensation for personnel or food assistance for personnel, as well as school supplies. So aside from working with medical facilities and schools, we try to assist in the provision of humanitarian assistance through houses of worship. Primarily, we're talking about Eastern Orthodox churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship, to make sure that food can be distributed in those houses of worship. People can seek some spiritual solace and peace, as well as some spiritual guidance and counseling, which is needed where many people have seen their loved ones perish or be injured and hurt. And also the setup of soup kitchens and cafeterias so people can receive food if they're not able to cook it at home, especially if you have lack of utilities where they usually live. We also try to provide assistance to Donbass's emergency services, to emergency medical services, the ambulance service, so they can come out and treat patients. In other words, you need working ambulances with all the medical supplies, with fuel, with food, and compensation for the emergency medical service personnel. We also try to help local firefighters and fire rescue, often who have to put out fires that have been caused by military activity and artillery fire or bombardment of any other type. Aside from helping emergency services crews, we understand that we also have to provide assistance to emergency utility crews that are supposed to be able to restore water delivery, electrical power, delivery of natural gas, working sewage systems. Those repair crews are also in need of equipment, fuel, compensation, and food. So if any of you can help or know organizations or people who can help us, please get in touch with us. And let's all try to help the civilian, innocent population of Donbass get through this time of civil war.